moderator today for this session. Host Power Your Organization Forward with the Data Cloud. We're really happy to have Elliot, Jacqueline, and Vincent here. Elliot, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kane. Thanks everyone for joining. My name's Elliot Jones. So I'm a sales director looking after ASEAN and Hong Kong markets from Snowflake. We're looking forward to the discussion today.
Jacqueline, maybe you could say the words.
Hi everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Jacqueline. I am the Chief Digital Officer for HGC Global Communications. We are a fixed line telecommunications operator that's based, our headquarters is in Hong Kong. We operate in more than 30 countries across the world. So this is a fabulous topic, and I hope everyone gets a lot out of it, and I'm sure I'll learn something too today.
Thank you. So we also have another guest, Vincent. I think he's going to be joining soon. Also, a little bit about myself. So I'm Kane, Chairman of Hong Kong Data Science Society, and I'm also the CEO of Thinkco, which is an AI consultancy firm in Hong Kong. So yeah, we're really happy to be here today to be talking about data, cloud, and also how to power an organization forward. So why don't we do a quick warm-up first and start doing a poll? So as you can see, there's a poll right here. If you guys could submit your answers, and I will go through the poll results with you guys a little later. So while you're doing the poll, we can start with our first question. So something quite general for you guys. What do you think is the role of data, and how have it evolved over the years for your organization? Also, what impact does it bring?
So you want me to start, Kane?
Sure, please.
Okay. So, we're a telco, right? We're a telecommunications company. So we have a lot of data from traffic data. We have a lot of transactional data. Most of it is data that's in our network. And it's very central. Like most companies, we're in many segments of the market. So we have a B2B, B2B, B2B2C. We have a wholesale market. We have an international, international segments. And then within all those segments, you've got more segmentation, right? So you've got industry segments, geography segments, etc. So for us, data is extremely important. One of the things that we do that we are actually really known for is cybersecurity solutions. So that in itself, that solution in itself comes with a lot of a big need to be data-driven, to understand the data, to not just be able to pull data together, but to also create insights and to actually understand the organization context in which that data sits. So for us, it's extremely important.
Thank you. Elliot, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, and I think from my side, so I work for Snowflake. So we're a cloud computing company, dealing predominantly with organizations from every single vertical, and their core asset, which is data. I think if you look at the data space today, you've got three major things that organizations we work with are looking at and affecting how they use data, which is first and foremost the rise of cloud. I think if you look at the pandemic everyone's been through globally, it's been a bit of a forced digital transformation, right? Everything's becoming more online, hence we're not doing this in person. And the byproduct of those online transactions is data. You've also then got the explosion of data. The amount of data, given Jacqueline's example there, the amount of data that is available to organizations today is quite staggering. And all of that data ultimately can be viewed as an untapped resource, right? It can drive insights across the business, and that insights from a business standpoint arguably every part of an organization today is becoming data-driven, whether you're looking at backwards-looking reporting, or, the more AI, ML, future reporting, and predictive analytics. So organizations we work with, they're trying to capture and make the most out of all of those three trends. And that's something we work with organizations to help solve those issues. But, across the board, data is key in every aspect of that.
Yeah, definitely. Again, Vincent, you have joined us. Thank you. Would you like to say a couple of words just to introduce yourself?
Hey, hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry, we had a bit of a technical issue here. So my name is Vincent, and I handle the technology side of Langquafong Group, which is property/F&B/hotel/other things in Hong Kong. And we've been ongoing through some very deep digital transformation for the past 2 years. And I'm happy to be here and share a bit what we've been doing and what we plan on doing for the next couple of months.
Thank you, Vincent. Yeah, we were just on the topic of data. Would you like to elaborate a little bit about how the Lan Kwai Fong Group has been using data?
It's the thing. So Lan Kwai Fong Group, we have very, very varied business units. So, for instance, for the F&B side, currently it's mostly related to CRM. How we can serve our customers better, trying to provide a bit more of a one-to-one discussion to them, because our clientele is pretty VIP, so they expect a certain level of service. So the tricky part is to try to remember who is who and what's their preferences. After, from the property side itself, we are analyzing a couple of data points that are available here and there to try to help on future property decision. And lately, I think it's been like a year maybe, we're putting a lot of emphasis on gathering as much data as we can from online advertising. And we've been quite ramping up the advertising side of the group. And I think as far as big data goes, that's probably one of the things where we get the most, at the same time, that's where we get the most data, and at the same time, that's where we had to work the most to make them actually usable by, especially marketing team, because sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. We get a ton of data points, and it's hard to make sense of all those things.
Yeah. So I think, like, for me myself, where I work with a lot of organizations in Hong Kong, and one of the biggest problems I see are data silos, where each BU has their own data. And as you mentioned, sometimes the data are not clean. How do you guys usually handle problems with data silos?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind jumping in first there. So yeah, Kane, I think it's an interesting point, right? I mean, as I mentioned, we work with a broad spectrum of organizations where they're doing a lot of interesting stuff with data, but predominantly, and I think, if you look at some of the challenges, right, whether we're talking about on-premise or in the cloud, ultimately going back to the point around how much data is available, it's coming in at such a rate, right, that it's being stored often in what we see as data silos or islands of data, and that can be from OLTP systems, OLAP systems, applications. It can be IoT, and in different formats, right? Structured data, semi-structured data, and ultimately, what organizations are looking to do, and be, in the context of becoming more data-driven, is to break down those silos. If you use an example like Customer 360, right? Often you will get one source of data, but how do you join that and join that with internal data sets, right? Or even third-party and external data sets. So what we're doing with Snowflake is giving organizations that single source of truth, where they can break down multiple different internal data silos, but also bridge the gap between internal first-party data with external third-party data, whether that is weather data to look at store traffic for in-person retail, or joining it up with market intelligence data from organizations like S&P Global. So ultimately, it's breaking down those silos so organizations can go from source system to analytics as quickly as possible, regardless of structure or data source. That's how we're helping organizations deal with silos.
Thank you.
So maybe Kane, let me put a context around this, right? I think for most organizations, right, with data lakes and data platforms like being in vogue for quite a while, I actually think most organizations have some form of centralization of data, right? Whether that be at the IT level or at a domain level, right? So people are starting to pull data together. Does it still sit in I wouldn't call them silos. I think the hardest part of data for most people is the stuff that sits on people's personal drives, right? Where they run models, where they have run, everyone's laughing, right? But it's true, where they've run models, where they've run SQL scripts, and they're running off their laptops because that's how they've generated it. It's actually moving that part into something that's more usable and more and democratize that part. I think it's today. I think today's problem is do you still have data silos and do you still have challenges centralization? I think some organizations do. I think the bigger issue with most organizations is that democratization of that usage, that the SQLs, the actual extractions, the actual applications of the data that's causing them to slow down in analytics, because you've got multiple fragmented views of what is to be analyzed, and everybody will have a different way of using that same piece of data. And to me, that is a far trickier issue for us to actually manage and deal with.
Yeah, thank you for that. And some of the organizations I see, especially when you were talking about data on the laptops, like there's also a lot of data on Excel sheets through legacy, and those are also some problems that I think we all have to tackle.
100%. And that, you know what, that is the data gold, because that has the knowledge, that has the insight, that has the domain understanding on how to use the data, that has also got derived values that you actually want to actually apply across the organization. And getting that out of laptops and Excel sheets is actually really quite difficult. There's one thing about asking everybody to put it on the leg, that's okay, but actually applying it to analytics across an organization is yet another skill set, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Vincent's laughing. I think Vincent has.
Yeah, because it touches so many issues. Me actually, I come from a much more cloud background. I used to do a lot of cloud computing in the past, so it was never a big issue from our side because everything was, especially, but not for those reasons. Actually, it all started because of security concerns. I want to avoid having people downloading potential personal data on their own laptop and things like that. So even if we're not perfect on this aspect, but I think we've been good students, and it's all. I think one of the things that was driving that is we actually created a ton of dashboards online that are pulling the data directly from the data lake. And so people don't really need to download data anymore. They just go to their self-service dashboard on internet, and they can make their own analysis there. So we just summarize, like I would say, the most common business cases across business unit, like what kind of data they need to do their daily work, and we just build the request, turn that into some interactive dashboard. And those days, I think few people need to really download stuff on their computer.
Vincent, I think that there's an element of truth there. I mean, we've got dashboards. We've got more dashboards. The ratio of dashboards and reports to user is, I don't know, more than beer drunk per head in Australia a year, right? It's phenomenal, and I think that's okay. And I think we like to think people will not download data and take it somewhere and mess around with it and do all that. Now, I think even if you had a data platform that provided all the tools to do that, you will still get that behavior, because guess what? Excel has existed a far longer time than data lakes and data platforms, and old habits are hard to break. The other thing too is we're a little bit democratic here, which is if a user actually does want to go and do it in Excel because it makes more sense, or they've linked another 40 Excel sheets to this thing, for the last 5 years. They're quite welcome to do that. The issue becomes, how do you get the knowledge, not necessarily the data? The data is not the issue. They're quite happy to dump their spreadsheets on you because it frees up, space on their laptop. It's the knowledge of how they are actually applying that data in their business. And that's the data silo. To me, that's the data silo in the organization today.
Yeah, I really do agree with that. Like the domain expertise is the part that we really want to get out of the data.
But I think from our side, because we have similar issues, and that's what, because actually when you say you got more dashboard than users, I know the feeling, and we went a bit through this crazy dashboard phase, but now we really try to. Even if, like you said, we try to be as flexible as possible, but we really try to tie a dashboard to a business case. And usually, from what I've noticed, if the needs actually come from the business and the operation, the dashboard tend to be more connected to reality. Because especially sometimes data scientists, they're very bright people, and they tend to go a bit crazy on the analysis, and it can be, it's very, from an academic point of view, it's very interesting, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really help the business needs. So those that we try to do a bit of an education work, like the operation is actually requesting for specific dashboards, and then we create them, not the other way around. We really try to empower the business to ask for proper request, and usually it works fine most of the time. Like it's they've been very happy with the kind of report we make actually. The latest example, I think that was our accounting. Like we automated some of their booking report or whatever, and they were very happy because they saved them a lot of time, and sometimes they could share that with the marketing people, so they can start optimizing online advertising and whatever. So it's much better when it comes from the end users.
Yeah. What I learned really is that data scientists really have to talk with the business user, and that when the request comes from the business user and the dashboard is what the business user have in mind, you don't really need the most prettiest thing. But then if it answers the business user's questions, then it's a successful dashboard that they will really use. I guess we have been speaking for around 17 minutes now. For our audience, if you have any questions, feel free to click on chat and ask any questions. At the end of this webinar, around 5 minutes before the end, we'll start going through your questions. Would also like to talk a little bit about the poll that you guys have done. So the poll with the most answers are C and D, which is that some decision making in my organization is driven by data, and that my organization is in early stages of trying to leverage data for decision making. And that's great, because in this talk, we're going to be talking a lot about how to make sure that we could use data to drive decision making. So since now we have went through 2 questions, let's do one more poll and see what we think about it. So again, let's try to answer the question: how open is your organization to cloud computing? All right, so while we are answering the poll, let's go on to another question. This question, actually, Elliot, you mentioned a little bit about, and that's about external sources. As we all know, right now, data is not just about all the data we have in the company and the organization. It's whether we could use external data, like, for example, stock prices, weather, anything out there, the open government data, any kinds of all the data. But the problem is, how do we make sure that that data is relevant and that we could connect it with the data internally?
Yeah, sure. So I guess you can answer that in a couple of different ways, right? But essentially, where Snowflake's quite unique is the vision behind our data cloud. And if you think of cloud today, right, you've got application clouds like Salesforce and Workday, and then you've got infrastructure clouds like AWS, Azure, GCP. And really, the vision behind the Snowflake Data Cloud is to be the conduit between those two cloud environments, right? Again, they're almost 2 different silos, going back to that analogy. But it's not just being the conduit between those two, but it's also connecting up every single Snowflake customer to external data. We've got over 4,000 customers now, and every single customer on Snowflake has access to the data cloud. And what that access gives you is the ability to share, consume, buy and monetize your own data or external data as well. And essentially, the fundamental technology piece behind it is our data sharing capability. I'm sure everyone on here has been through this process, but you think how data is shared typically today, right? Whether it's CSV files or opening up APIs or sending it over email. Typically, you have to compress data, encrypt it, transmit it, and then from the consumer side, download, decrypt, manipulate, load, error check. Then you run your analytics on top of it. And what Snowflake is saying is this is, it's an outdated and sometimes unsecure, particularly if you're copying multiple copies of data and sending it over email, becomes a governance and security nightmare, right? And what we do in Snowflake is we can actually just provide a window into the data set. And you can provide that view out to different departments within your business, but also to external providers as well. And you can also take that one step further and do that in what we call a data clean room, which is essentially taking two different data sources from two different parties, maintaining the privacy and integrity of those data sets, but allowing them to be put into a clean room and run analytics on top of it. So it's an interesting use case, certainly one that we've seen over the last 12 months really take off, particularly in retail. And that vertical from Snowflake. So yeah, I'll park it there for now.
Thanks for that. It's really interesting about what you mentioned about privacy. Jacqueline or Vincent, do you guys have anything to add about external data sources and data marketplaces?
Vincent, you want to go ahead?
Actually, what Elliot, you mentioned a good point here that there are two. I know it's going to sound quite basic, but there are really two main directions. It's like you as an organization sharing data to other people and receiving data from third party. So in my experience, receiving data is often quite straightforward because we build a system to accept as much data as possible, and connecting it to our data lake is actually not that much of a complicated issue. And for this, we need to remain quite flexible on this, because it's like you say, unfortunately, not everyone is as modern as you guys. So we still ingest a lot of data the old-fashioned way, and sometimes it's there's just no choice around it, especially from the retail world, where I will spare you the horror stories of the handwritten data, but. So this one, I would say, is pretty straightforward. We just accept any kind of data we have, we clean it, and send it to the database. It's very. But the other point that I think is much more interesting is actually sharing data with other companies. And this one is mostly done to policies. It's like you say, maybe not at a software level, but really as a policy level, is making sure we share the absolute minimum to third parties. And this requires a bit of effort, and requires the teams to be properly educated around this issue, which is something I have to say, in Europe and in the States, it's much more advanced than in Asia. This concept, like in Europe, we got the whole RGPD regulation that really was quite. I would say brutal in terms of educating data people. And we still have this culture in Asia that's, but it's coming. I think people are making good progress into the right direction. But at the end of the day, it's really making sure the teams are educating around a couple of key principles, like really sharing the absolute necessary. Also, some concept about how long data will be kept in the third party. Those are concepts. Actually, just this morning, I received a SMS campaign from a local shop, like last time I interacted with this business was like 2 years ago, and I still receive a SMS from those guys. And I was like, well, so those are those are key concepts. Those kind of data privacy fundamental concept. I think it's just education work to do, and you can have the best solution, the best software in the world, but if you don't do this fundamental work of education to make sure everything is enforced every day, you're not going to go very, very far in terms of compliance.
We've got, maybe I can offer 3 contexts, right, for which HTC looks at this when you talk about external data. The first one is external data that we use as a company, right? So what we use ourselves. And I would agree with Vincent, we don't really have an issue of trying to push that data in, right? Instead, there's a lot of free sources of data. You've got WHO, you've got RODA, Google has open source, the US government and Census Bureau, huge amount of data, and you've got Hong Kong OpenGov, right? So if you look hard enough, there's enough open data and external data. You can, if you want to pay money, you can do, one of the agencies that give you good segmented data. The challenge of a lot of this data, unless it's specific to something you've asked for, it's generic data. It's broad data. So it poses some challenges within us. It's not really getting the data in. It's actually, what do you want to use the data for? And if I start importing a huge amount of data sets, I need an architecture that actually allows people to play and innovate with them. Because they're trying to figure out what's the best way of applying it, right? They've not really done that before. So you actually need, as part of your architecture, the components that say, okay, I'm going to put it over here, play around with it, create these models, make some inferences. I have some hypothesis attached to it, and I might actually aggregate it in a different way. So that's the first context in which we do have challenges. We absolutely have challenges with it. And thinking of enough use cases that actually would involve an external data source. And that comes from, as what Vincent is saying, a lot of education, because when people have done what they've done for the last few years, even if it's just 1 year in a row, it's really hard for them to think that they could actually use something else to achieve a different result. And what is that different result? So that's the first context of external data. The second context of external data is along the lines of what Vincent said. We have a lot of customers, and they would love to use our data. We're a telco. I don't want to scare anybody, but we kind of know where you live. We kind of can figure out how many people there are. We kind of know, without knowing the content, we kind of know when you're using on your internet, and what's your peak hour, and kind of what you're doing on it, right? But as I said, I don't want to scare people. There's a lot of privacy laws that prevents us from using it. Now, could we actually use that data to help our customers to figure out what's actually good for people? Are you maximizing the use of things? Should you be doing something else? Did you get security attacks over this at a certain hour? All those sorts of things, right? It's actually really useful for the end user themselves, and it's useful for other suppliers trying to help end users. I'm not suggesting we sell data. We actually don't. We're actually, I think, one of the few utilities and telco providers. We don't sell our data. We actually look at it as how can people use it for betterment of something. And we've had a lot of people approach us for it. Our issue is 1, ethics, 2, privacy, 3, security. And we haven't found a good enough case or reason where we would even aggregate our users' data on any shape, form, or platform and provide it and share that data to somebody else, right? So it's like a use case waiting to be discovered. And if someone can tell me a good one, I'm more than happy to entertain that, right, and hear about it. So that's the second context. The third context is we actually run a lot of solutions that generate data for our customers. So someone like Lang Kwai Fong with shopping centers and traffic and etc. So we've got customers where we will basically rig up the whole property building, and I can tell you how many people through the platform are in front of the toilet, whether or not they've had to how many people walked across a certain thoroughfare at any point in time, right? Any data to deal with a retail space. Now, the question is, how do you enrich that data for the tenants in that building, for the outcomes, if you like, in this case, for the outcomes of our customer, which would be something like a B2B, right? So how would we enrich that? I think providing insights for them that's just about, what's happening within the building is one part of the insights, but what's happening around them? Why did people come in? Why was there an increase in the traffic on the day? Was it raining, for example? Why did they not all come in that day? Was it because down the street, let's say LKF Central, there was, a outdoor event that everybody, went and stood around for an hour during that? So you got to enrich that with a lot of data, seasonality, and things like that. And I think that's where it can be actually really rich. But I think back to what Vincent said before, it's best those things are best coming from the user.
Thank you for that very thorough answer.
So,
Yeah, which again is back to about, I think, Jacqueline, you also mentioned this for a little bit about data democratization, about like in the organization, how could everyone have the right access to the data they have and to build up the culture so that they could create good dashboards and good analysis to actually bring business value to the company. So do you guys have any challenges with that? Like how to make sure that data is open to everyone in the company?
Absolutely. I don't think I'd be lying if I said we've got it all down pat. No, we have the same challenges that any organization does. We really desperately want to open data, right? We really desperately want to make it self-serve. I think when somebody has a toy to play with, it's the best thing to get the organization data-driven, data-educated, and actually applying it to their own examples. I mean, we and my team cannot be everywhere to provide that service. So where we struggle is a lot of the ownership issues, right? A lot of ownership, policy, governance. Vincent, you know what it feels like, Vincent? It's so painful. And things like identity management, allowing and and at the moment, technology is so great. You could get these sorts of things down to a data object level, but how do you do it? How does it fit in with privacy policies or data usage policies or IT usage policies that may not have quite caught up with this? I can think of so many organizations where even their cybersecurity policies are probably a little bit outdated because cybersecurity moves so fast, right? So we really struggle with that, and we struggle to basically stay current. And as with most organizations, I think we err on the side of being cautious and risk averse, which is unless we're pretty sure, then we may not want to do it, or we probably won't do it. And that's really important, especially with the onus of being custodians of data assets, such as we are.
Thank you for that. Vincent, do you have anything to say?
I think from our side, because we're quite lucky because we're not a gigantic organization. We're still relatively, I say we're a medium-sized big company. So the person in charge of data and IT, that's me. So it's so I was able to tie a lot of IT policies to our data policies. So that was because I know in a lot of organizations sometimes like it's a bit of a tug of war between the compliance officer, the data guy, and the marketing. So luckily we were able to find a way so it makes sense. And we started right from the start to categorize data into different levels. We have the one that are for a bit of background, my dad was in the army actually, so I kind of copied what they were doing there. So we got different level of data. We have the one that says open for everyone to use, the confidential one, and the super sensitive stuff. And for each of those data, actually, we of this level of data, we have different speed to move to digitalize them. Like for example, the data that is for public knowledge. So usually it's like non-personal data and non-related to HR. We just open everything for everyone in the company to access it. We don't really care about security that much because they are not confidential or whatever, and they will have no harm into sharing them. And like on the other hand of the spectrum, we got the super sensitive data. Those ones actually are still very, very far, or maybe very early in the digital transformation process, and we keep everything in a bit in the old-fashioned way, where I would say sometimes it's actually a bit more secure because we got our, for example, financial data or HR data is still kept. Everything is kept very locally, and it's quite hard to access them. And for this, it takes a bit more time to move them to a cloud solution. So yeah, really, I think categorizing data sensitivities has been really helping us into moving things faster, at least for the non-sensitive data.
Wow, that's amazing. How long did it take you to do all of that classification of data?
It's not finished yet,
Project,
I think
right?
it doesn't really stop, but we started having this mindset 1 or 2 years ago, and it's really ongoing. And now we are trying to go to the next step, is how do we anonymize some personal data to turn them into something that can become open for general knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Elliot, would you like to chip in on this?
Yeah, I suppose it's different perspective from me because it's not me doing all of the heavy lifting that Jacqueline and Vincent are, right? But I think the one thing we see across industries, but also across different maturity levels of customer, is definitely I think agree to the point that predominantly, whether you're talking about different departments within different departments or business units within an organization, or whichever part of the organization has that data, ultimately there is that, we want to hold on to it, right? And not lose control over that data. So that's something we definitely see. In terms of speeding it up, I think, as mentioned, the security, governance and controls in place are absolutely key for any organization, and should be. I think being a cloud company is the first thing we like to address. Ultimately, we wouldn't be an organization if putting your data on the cloud wasn't safe. But you see a lot of organizations, it's a big paradigm shift, and whether they're on-premise taking their first steps into the cloud, or fully cloud native, there's varying levels of that spectrum, and a lot of it can be due down to the culture of the organization, the leadership that are taking them through that cloud transformation, the partners involved, and vendors involved. So it can be a big paradigm shift. Certainly the challenges mentioned are absolutely relevant for all of any organization we deal with and speak to.
Thank you for that. And do you have any tips on how to usually ease the transition and the challenges?
Yeah, as another, we could do a separate fireside chat just on that. I think I think easing the journey to cloud, you need, especially you look at ASEAN, right? It's a lot easier in EMEA and America, certainly, because there's less regulators you have to deal with. I mean, we work out of Singapore, covering 14 different countries, right? And there's a lot of regulators, especially if you're covering more countries. So there's a lot of compliance, a lot of regulatory approvals you need to go through. But ultimately, if you've got the right leadership in place, and the organization, needs to do that transformation to compete, right, to stay relevant. And a lot of that is being driven out of cloud technologies, not just Snowflake. It can be, there's plenty of interesting cloud companies, right? Whether you're looking at AI, ML, and all the various different use cases. So I think speeding it, having the right culture in place, having the right people in place, the right support from the vendors, but also the regulatory bodies, is absolutely key.
Thank you. I think this is a good segue into the poll that we just did earlier, which is how open is your organization to cloud computing? And then we have 42% of our respondents saying that somewhat open, but with some concerns, security, cost, people, and culture resistance, which I guess Elliot just touched on a little bit. Is there anything else more you want to talk about to people's concern about security, cost, people, and culture resistance?
For me, sorry, do you want me to take on? Yeah, I guess we've kind of covered a lot of it. I'm not sure there's too much to add. I mean, when it comes to cloud, there are a number of different considerations, as you said, like cost, security, those sorts of things. But then you look at the amount of cloud that's slowly being adopted. Like if we're talking to traditional on-premise organizations, a lot of them use products like Salesforce. A lot of them use GA analytics, those sorts of products. So it's inching towards that, right? But it is fundamentally different from putting your core data assets in the cloud. And usually, how they get there is moving more non-franchise critical applications, right? Moving those over. Maybe there's they can be a lower cost center for you in the cloud. But then sometimes not, right? I mean, you've got organizations that are still running mainframes and they're not going to be moving anywhere soon, right? So it's taking those steps and also getting the value. As Vincent said, right? What's the use case? What's the business value? Because ultimately it always goes back to, adopting cloud is a hot topic. But ultimately, what is the bottom line you're driving back to the business? Is it, efficiency, cost savings from an operational standpoint? But really, from a growth perspective, are we adding more revenue, right? And that's really the conversation that's been driven in a lot of our customers.
Thank you. I guess we could go on to our next poll, the third poll. So the question is, what are the main barriers to digital transformation within your organization? So while we are doing that, let's go on to our next question. I could see in Hong Kong especially that a lot of companies and organizations are building data teams because they want to make sure that data analytics are a true core of the business. Do you guys have any tips for organizations trying to build such data teams?
Vincent, you want to go first, or you want me to jump in?
Well, I can start because our team is pretty small, I would say, in size. But I think the hiring process, I realize it's really about sometimes actually the hiring manager needs to be much more open-minded, I would say, because I've noticed a lot of, and this is I had very interesting discussion with some friends that are working in HR and hiring. A lot of hiring managers are focusing on skill sets, which, frankly speaking, in Hong Kong, there is not much. I mean, no, there are skills in Hong Kong. It's just you don't have data master, first a master in data or things like this. So, and even from universities, like there's classes like, it's not because a guy knows how to write Python script that is a good data engineer. So usually I tend to find people that have a bit more of an entrepreneurship mindset, and we will talk. That's the thing. That's what our founder Alan Zimani always tells me. You need to think about the business. At the end of the day, we're here to do business. So I prefer hiring people that are much more business oriented, less academic usually. And if they need to learn new skills, it's not that hard. I think that's my main advice for building data team.
I totally agree with that. That's exactly the criteria I hire too, because I believe that data scientists, that you really have to talk to business users and to understand business value before you could actually do anything that is helpful for the business. Jacqueline or Elliot, do you guys have anything else to add?
No, I was doing this. I'm going to say paper for ourselves the other day, and I had a look at just in Hong Kong alone how many jobs were open for data scientists. It was something like 19,000 just on one job site.
Wow.
I didn't look anywhere else because I presume people post on multiple job sites, right? But say just on the biggest one that we have, right? Online job site, it's 19,000 just in Hong Kong alone. And I think Hong Kong itself suffers from, there's definitely a lack of technical skills. So if you had to compare the quality, the depth, and even maybe the breadth of skills that we could access within the Hong Kong market, it's definitely not as great as some other markets where, the use of data, ML, is actually quite commercialized and quite within organizations already. And those are normally like the bigger B2C markets. You find them in the bigger B2C markets, right? So I find that we're challenged in that already. While we to look for, people that have, that extra, I'm going to say, business lens in which they see the world. And one of the questions I will always ask for anybody I hire as a data scientist is, tell me about the project and tell me how much this project actually made. Right. So, what was your ROI from using data? And that's the key question for any data scientist these days. You've got to actually prove value, not just prove that they can write a lot of code. So I agree with that view. I think, unfortunately, where you have a rather shallow, I'm going to say Hong Kong's a rather shallow market when it comes to that sort of practice, you won't get a lot of those skills in the market. So we've had to look outside. And it's not that we don't hire in Hong Kong. We hire in a variety of places, and we partner. We absolutely partner because they've got the biggest hope of getting good skills in. So we have probably what I would call an ecosystem of data skills.
Thank you. Elliot, is there anything you want to add about data team?
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging actually to hear that from your perspective, because I mean we work with a lot of data teams, right? And you see various different aspects to those teams, and usually super smart. I always leave feeling a little less intelligent whenever I'm dealing with the engineers, but ultimately it goes back to what Vincent said and what Jacqueline touched on, which is there's plenty of super academic, super enthusiastic people who can write a lot of code, but ultimately it always goes back to the business value. And Jacqueline's point, we were in a discussion with one of the CTOs from a bank in Singapore just yesterday, going through the same process, hiring data scientists, and none of them have worked on a production system ever, right? And he's kind of pulling his hair out, going, how do you hire? And yeah, it is certainly a challenge in the region, not just Hong Kong, but something we hear from customers in Singapore. But I think that criteria and looking for business savvy, entrepreneurial mindsets for those positions ultimately will pay dividends once they come into the organization and start working on the environments.
Yeah, I really echo that. Especially a point that you bring out is deployment. Actually, a lot of data scientists, like Kaggle masters, they would know nothing about deployment. And so that is something that I think data scientists, data team leaders have to think about as well, is like how do you actually deploy a model, regardless of what cloud you use. Another point that I also want to...
Can I add to that, right?
Yes, of course.
I think there's two things with this, right? Where the world is going, and this is the thing that, we struggle, and I struggle to put in grain. What I find with a lot of data scientists, and even the good ones, right? They look at models very singularly. So they'll say, okay, so what we're trying to solve here today is X, right? And they'll say, okay, we're trying to do preventative maintenance, right? So we're going to put a model out to solve X. And you go, well, that's good, but guess what? When you look at something that has gotten to the point of preventative maintenance, it actually went through a journey, whether it's a human journey, a system journey, a process journey. It went through a journey. And actually through that journey, right, you would need to apply different data models. Let's call them data models, or any sort of algorithm, right? But they're different models. So at the start of the lifetime, you might be able to use some other historical data. So you're doing descriptive data, right? Transactional descriptive data, and say, okay, so the 10 widgets that went before you had this behavior, therefore you should organize. Now, midlife, it's going to do something else, right? And then near end life, where it's gonna like have a heart attack and die and set your house on fire, it's gonna have something else. So actually, you need your data scientists to actually understand and that's the challenge, and that's what we're finding really, really hard in the market.
Yeah, I think the main point is monitoring of data models, which again is that most data scientists that only uses Kaggle might not be too familiar with about monitoring production models. One more problem that I usually see in companies is that actually, as a data scientist team, sometimes you have to do PR for yourself because you work with a lot of BUs.
Yes.
I see Vincent smiling here. So, Vincent, would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
No, because that makes me smile, because I remember one day I had this new data scientist on board, and I told him, this is my findings. So tomorrow you present that in front of our CEO. He almost had a stroke. He was like, I don't want to talk to our CEO. And say, no, but you have to. It's important. Like he worked very hard on something, and it's like you say, he needs to share the hard work and explain he's the one behind that, because it's important for him personally in his career, and also to do a better job in the company. So, it happened to me like 2 years ago, and that still makes me smile, actually.
Vincent, they're Python coders. They don't.
Sorry?
I said they're Python coders. They don't want to do that.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I don't believe that.
Yeah, I think one of the most important skill sets as a data scientist is to explain the models so that the business user really appreciate what you do and believe in it.
Yeah. One of the things, Kane, I mean, as part of the data science society, that we could actually do is actually mentor some of these data scientists, to broaden their views of enterprise and organizations. And I think that's going to be a very valuable skill.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Because actually, a lot of the projects we do, we spend most of the time making PowerPoints. And for a lot of data scientists, they might be like, well, that's not sexy. But that's how you make sure that your client appreciate what you do and your client believe in what you do. So you explain why we're using these models and why the results make sense.
Just sell them, Kane. It's unstructured data. PowerPoint is unstructured data.
Yeah. Elliot, is there any thing you want to chime in on this, or?
No, I'm good. I think nothing to add from my side.
Okay. Since it's 2:52, I guess we could go through some of the questions from the Q&A. We have a question from Lance. What do you think about data stewardship? Do you have challenges introducing it to the company? I know you guys talked about data champions a little earlier. So I guess you guys could elaborate on that.
Vincent, by all means.
Also, as a question, what do you think about data? From our side, again, our data structure is not that complicated compared to a massive structure like, I don't know, random example, a telecom company. But it's so it went quite easy. It went quite organically because it's tied to our IT and digital transformation. So but the main challenge, I would say, was to mostly convince this is an investment that won't have immediate return on investment. But luckily, there was a couple of scary data leak case in Hong Kong a couple of years ago. So that actually, I'm not ashamed to say sometimes it's good to do a bit of fear mongering, like something very bad might happen if we don't do things properly.
So for me personally, I've actually introduced data stewards or the concept of data stewards previously, right? And in that particular company, it worked well because the structure of the company actually was geared up to have the full-blown I'm going to say, full-blown data governance framework, all the way from policy, into metadata management and the whole lot. Who owns the data dictionary, who owns glossaries and things like that, right? So that was a different organization. So I think data stewardship really depends on your organization. I can tell you that when I've done it in HGC, it's a little challenging because the first question is, so is this a role? You're asking me to do something new? All right, so a whole lot of education. And what is this? What am I? And how would I know? So if somebody asked me, why would I know the answer? I'm just one person in this department. So there was a lot of that. So how we've done it is I've sort of dropped the idea of the formality of data stewardship and focus really on who is entitled to what and at what point in time and for how long. And if you ask yourself that constantly, you'll end up having a framework of governance that you need, right? And so I always go, it depends on your organization. The hardest thing for us is things like that. They are business, I'm going to say sensitive data, but they're not exactly business confidential data, right? So for example, who in the company can get the month and sales figures? So they're nothing, they're just aggregate figures, but who can get it? And does getting it from one business unit versus getting it for 10 business units make any difference to its sensitivity? And those are really hard questions. And we sort of took, as I said, it depends on the organization. We're just risk averse, so we took a risk averse view on those pieces of data. And I'm sorry, there's no exact answer to this one. It's really about your organization and what they prepared for.
Yeah, definitely. But I think you gave some really good insights on how to kind of deal with some challenges. I guess, Elliot, we have a couple of questions on cloud, so we'd like to direct them to you. Let me try to combine them since we only have around 5 minutes or so. One is, what revolution do you see in future cloud security services? On a similar vein, what are some common challenges do you see with organizations shifting to cloud? I know you mentioned that a little earlier as well. And also, what is your experience with influencing people and culture for cloud adoption?
Yeah, so given the time, I'll probably try and get through them as quickly as possible. In terms of the future for cloud security services, I mean, there's a lot in place. Again, I think you can break that down into two different bits, right? Which is vendor focus and also organizational. Who you're providing the service to, and then there's an industry around that itself. So I won't dive too much into that, and I think we've touched upon some of the common challenges in shifting to the cloud, and I think going into the third one, which is really around shifting to the cloud, the challenges you face and influencing people and culture to get to the cloud. I think again it goes back to the fundamental question, right, which is use case driven. And what's the business value? Ultimately, some organizations are better off on-prem, and cloud isn't a silver bullet for everybody. That said, certainly from what we're seeing, the three big areas and use cases are across risk mitigation, across reducing operational overhead. You compare cloud to on-prem, it's a vast difference in terms of cost. And then also growth opportunities, right? Again, connecting to things like Salesforce, connecting to various different other data sources, providing analytics to the business much faster speed. So again, it all goes back to what's your use case, what business value can be driven from it, and then assessing that against your on-prem options versus cloud. And if the economics make sense, then it should be an easier shift for everyone to get on board with.
Thank you. I guess we have time for one more question. So this question is about the skill sets for being a data scientist. Vincent, you mentioned earlier that data-related roles and jobs are quite specific, and you have to deal with a lot of things like regulatory, compliance, ethics, and stuff. And you also mentioned about being an entrepreneur, like that's the skill set you're looking for. Would that be enough, or would a person need to have some more specific skills to be able to step into the domain of data scientists, data analysts?
Well, there are different concepts that are a bit mixed here. The first one is about ethics, and this is not a skill set. Like you have it or you don't. But there's not much talking about it. But in terms of hard skills, it depends where you are in the if it's a junior position. I don't think you need a lot of skills because, it's like Jacqueline said, usually companies, they got an established framework, and you need to have. It's more about the discipline to follow a framework, and sometimes the curiosity to try to improve this framework. And if you are a bit more senior, well, this gets a bit more tricky. You definitely need to have, I would say, background skills related to analytics in general. But I would assume this question is more like to start your career as a data scientist. So I would say trust the existing rules in the organization and get enough curiosity and to challenge them to see if you can improve, bring your own contribution. And in terms of very hard skills, it's always better if you have a bit of analytical background, like a degree in mathematics or maybe first experience in statistics. But I don't believe no one. I do think everyone can learn.
Thank you. Jacqueline, would you like to chime in on this question as well?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything Vincent has said. This is so important, to cultivate all those things that Vincent has said. I mean, the one thing I would add is that as a data scientist, don't go looking for a problem to solve. There are lots of problems to solve. You need to understand what your company's trying to achieve more than anything first. Right. Yeah. I see so many data scientists, and they, got this big X called data, and they're going to try and swing it at everything. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So, open your mind a little bit. You're there as the data scientist, but not every problem may have the data solution you think you want to attach to it.
Thank you. Elliot, any last words before we end the seminar?
No, nothing for me.
Okay. Well, in that case, we would really like to thank the audience for joining us today. Hope you guys learned a lot about powering your organization forward with data and also with cloud. We look forward to you guys joining our future events. And I guess that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.